Hi, everybody. It's 4 o'clock Pacific time, and we're going to start the podcast now. So I'm Stephen David Horwich. I will tell you a little about myself to begin so that you know who I am. For now, what I would like you to do, if you could, is just listen in and kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. And at a certain point, a little bit up the road, I'll be asking for questions, and there'll be a few other people coming on to talk, and we'll try and keep things light and fun. But for now, and until we ask for questions, just listen in and enjoy it and kind of make a list of questions you might want to ask me. So again, I'm Stephen David Horwich. I've been a professional educator for 45 years. A little over 45 years. I taught at USC in the Professional Writers Program in my early 20s. I taught for the Los Angeles Unified School District at the high school level for a year. That was just about all I could stand in public education, and I left. I lectured at many colleges dealing with professional writing and directing and the performing arts, including at UCLA and Pierce College and LACC and a few other colleges and universities. After that, I taught private workshops for writers and actors, and I actually started doing that at a pretty young age and have done that for over 45 years. I created performing arts and music programs for about 10 years at various private schools where my own children were attending. But the entire time that I was teaching in private schools, I felt like my kids were getting an okay education, but not really what I wanted for them, and I wanted very much to home educate them. My wife at the time was not really in favor of homeschooling. This was quite a while ago. This was in the late 1990s, and she was a teacher, among other things, who worked for the public schools and really felt that the kids should be in a school environment. She passed away in 2001 when my two children were ages 13 and 9. And at that point, very shortly thereafter, I decided to go ahead and homeschool them for a lot of reasons, which I'll discuss shortly. So I homeschooled for about 7 years and started writing a curriculum, which we currently call STEPS, and we offered it publicly, but we provided it, originally it was written for my children and for 8 other children, 8, who would come to my house every day. For about 2-3 years, we had 10 children in the house every day. I was writing curriculum, they were doing the curriculum, and 2 other parents helped out by sort of supervising and making sure that the kids were doing whatever the work was. And that allowed me to see how well the curriculum worked at the time because I had 10 students in the house, and I could go and fix things and move things around and repair them when they didn't quite work for the students. So that continued for a number of years. I ran a small private school also for a year to test out the curriculum and to find better ways to successfully educate and successfully home educate. And accordingly, I've been a homeschool advocate now for roughly 16 years. I've authored various books about the subject of education and home education, and I've authored a comprehensive K through 12 curriculum, which we currently call STEPS. So that is my background as an educator quickly. And what I'm going to discuss today has to do mostly with the best way to educate a child, any child, in any situation. Fortunately or unfortunately, I think based on the criteria for a really good education, your best shot is going to be home education, homeschooling, to be able to do some of the things I've discussed. They're very hard to do in a school situation. Public schools don't work that way, and even most private schools work in a very different way than home education does. They don't have the freedom, and they don't have the perspective to be able to alter the education being provided for individual children. They have a classroom situation. And even in a good private school, and I taught at some very good private schools, you still have 10 students, 12 students in the classroom. And there are established criteria for the school of what they need to get through in a year, and it's limiting. You can't change it easily. You can't change it very well for individual students. The problem with that is, of course, students learn as individuals. You can't teach a classroom because that's not how we learn. We learn one fact at a time, one person at a time, one skill at a time, one person at a time. You have a student in front of you who either picks up the material and understands it and knows how to work with it, or they do not. But as a classroom, you can't alter your direction or change your approach, not very much, in order to accommodate specific students, their specific needs, their specific interests. And that kind of thing is what we're going to talk about today. So there are going to be 4 topics of discussion. I'm going to talk about why you should homeschool. I'm going to talk about what an ideal education might include. I will talk about STEPS, my curriculum, and how it can contribute to an ideal education. And then I'm going to invite your questions about home education and education in general and STEPS. And I hope that some of you will have questions and interesting things you want to talk about and all of that. Now, currently, I'm the only one talking and everybody else is muted on our end of things. When I ask for questions, we will unmute you. And if you don't want to talk or you don't want the noise in your house or whatever to be heard, please at that time mute your phone and continue to listen. Please mute your phones and continue to listen when we ask for questions. All right, so let's get into the first subject here, which is why homeschool. There are distinct advantages to home education, some of which I've already kind of referenced, but I'll get into a little bit more detail now and discuss what some of those advantages are. There's actually 3 areas, 3 large advantages, 3 large areas of advantage for home education over any school situation. We're not just talking about public schooling now, which is the most limiting form of education available to us. It is, quote, unquote, free, though it costs the country over $600 billion a year. But it is free to the family, ostensibly, though there are costs, as all moms and dads who've had kids in public schools know. There are some costs attached to it. It isn't as expensive, obviously, as private education, but it can be as expensive as homeschooling, and it can be, very demanding in other ways. So here are the 3 areas of advantage a homeschooler has over a family that is sending their kid to any school situation, private or public. First of all, a homeschooler is free to teach how you wish to teach. That means that you're dealing with an individual student instead of a classroom, and you can focus on the best way your student learns. Now, that's a very important idea because not everybody learns well in the same way or with the same approach. There are students who learn best and most quickly and are most comfortable reading. They're good at reading, understanding what they read, pulling information out of what they read, and really being able to integrate it and make use of it. There are students who are much better off with a hands-on, experiential approach to education. Students who really need to get their hands dirty doing something in order to make whatever it is that you're trying to teach them a part of the way they are, a part of their mindset, and to integrate it into their own method of thought. Sometimes students who work well experientially also read well and learn well that way. Sometimes they do not. It depends very much on the student. Some students work best learning with a visual context. They need visual aids, not to be too stupid about it, because we all make jokes about visual aids in education, but there are students who really work best with visual aids and need them and want them. And And, I'm sure you've seen times when your student really worked best when they saw something, a picture. It's hard to describe or learn about Impressionist painters without actually seeing an Impressionist painting. So there are definitely occasions when a visual aid is required in education, and there are learners who work best with visual content. Another approach that works very well for some students and not as well for other students is a Socratic approach, an approach that requires a lot of discussion between the teacher and the student, or between the student and other students, where a lot of questions are asked and ideas are shaped and formed carefully through a question and answer process. It is called the Socratic method because it goes back to Socrates, the Greek philosopher. And there are definitely students who work best arguing, discussing, chatting, and sharing ideas. And then, of course, there are students who work in entirely other ways that, these more standardized ways to approach education are generally used, but there are students who need really other approaches for all kinds of reasons. And then there are students who work best with a combination of approaches. They read well, they write well, they need hands-on experience, but they don't like to talk. So the Socratic method doesn't work for that student, that particular student. They don't like hands-on experiential approaches to education. They don't like getting their hands dirty. And that's a student who's going to maybe be better off reading and writing and discussing. So as a home educator, you're looking at your child or your children. And you as a parent or a home educator, both in this case, you know that student better than anybody. You look at their strengths, you know their weaknesses, you know what they complain about, you know what they accept and are willing to try to do. So you are the best judge along with your student in discussion and collaborating with them. You are the best judge of determining the best approach to educating them. And some of it comes down to how much structure they need and how much structure they don't need. Some students require a great deal of structure in order to learn and progress. Other students, less structure in order to progress. And all of that can be evaluated and measured by you, the parent, as a home educator, and the student, him or herself. It really should be a collaborative thing. We provide in a book called The Homeschooler's Handbook tools that make it very easy, much easier, to allow the student and the teacher to coordinate their efforts to find the best method of educating that particular child. So the first advantage in homeschooling is that you're free to teach how you want to teach, focusing on the best way that your student learns. The next advantage is you're free to teach what you want to teach. That includes the selection of subjects that you decide to teach. Now, this gets contentious or can get contentious. There are students, absolutely, who don't want to do, for instance, math. They don't want to do math. It's like a punishment for them. It's like you're, putting them into a thumb screw and tightening it. And there are students who hate history. There are students who hate creative writing. There are students who hate various subjects and love other subjects. I think that is probably a fair description of just about every student. We all have our likes and dislikes. Whether we're 10 years old or 40 years old is irrelevant. We all have subjects we're better at than others. We all have subjects we enjoy more than others. And given our preference, we have subjects we would never look at again as long as we live. And your student is no exception to that. Your student is a human being, and they're going to have their own biases and their own strengths and their weaknesses. Now, you are free as a home educator to determine what is studied. You can select subjects with the student to some extent. That said, every student should be exposed to the essentials of every important subject. Whether they like it or not, they're going to need some math in order to get along in the world and do their bank book and and do their taxes and survive. You have to have enough math to do certain basic functions in this world. You need to understand some amount of science in order to know how the things around you are work. Your computer, your phone, how do these things even exist? The world is engined by science now. So without having any scientific knowledge at all, any grounding, I think you're kind of awash in this civilization. You have to know some science. You need to know some history and some of the aspects of history connected to it, like, religion. It's a driving factor in our world today, and without an understanding of all the major religions, at least an understanding, not an indoctrination, but an understanding, you're dealing then with unknowns. And it's a big, scary world when you don't know what you're looking at. You don't know anything about Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism or Islam. This can be bad, Hinduism. You really want to at least have a working understanding of what people believe and how they practice so that you aren't, A, terrified by it, and B, mystified by it. Economics and politics are part of a study of history. And without an understanding of economics, again, you're pretty much, floating in the ocean without a raft. And without an understanding of politics, it's a recipe for an uneducated electorate and a disaster in the making. All righty, so you are free to pick the subjects with your student, and you are also free to pick the curriculum you use in order to teach those subjects. There are unschoolers who prefer to not use curriculum and use what happens in a day, as an example, as teaching moments. I think that's okay in a limited fashion. Personally, I don't think it's enough structure, and it's too easy to miss very important things that should have been covered in each subject. I prefer personally a more coordinated, designed curriculum, and I think that's your best bet in making sure that your student actually gets everything in a subject. You are also free, as far as teaching what you wish to teach, to engage in your own biases. My own antipathy in education is for indoctrination. I don't like it. I don't think education should be used to indoctrinate a student into any belief system of any kind. I think the student should be exposed to many, many, many belief systems and many, many systems like science and religion, and let the student look at them and understand them and determine for him or herself what they are interested in and want to know more about and what they don't want to know about. So you are free to teach what you wish, subjects, curriculum, and your own approach or biases. And we all have biases. Everybody has biases. You're also free to organize how you educate as you see fit. You get to schedule as a homeschooler. You're not obligated to do a 9 to 4 or 3 like a school. You can start when your student gets up and is really ready to learn. You could start at 2 in the afternoon if you're set up for that, and that's the best time of the day for your student, since it's all about making sure the student receives an actual education. You can skip grading, and I advise you very strongly to do so. Grades are punitive. They don't teach a student anything. They don't give us anything, so in the way of educating him. So you are free to organize education and keep records and do rewards and punishments if you must, as you see fit. All right, it's 20 minutes in now. I was hoping that Linz was going to call. So let's take off the mute and see if Linz is there. Can we do that? Hello? Linz, is anybody there?
Hello there.
All callers are muted. All callers are unmuted.
Good. So it says unmuted. Linz, do you happen to be there? I was expecting her around 5:15, 5:20, 4:15, 4:20 rather. Good. All right, you're all unmuted. If anybody has any questions, we can take questions at this point, or I'll move on. Either way. Anybody there? Anybody want to talk? Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and mute everybody again so we don't hear all the secondary noise, and then I'll just continue. So could we do that?
All callers are muted and they can unmute themselves.
All right. So you should be able to hear me again now. And I'm going to go and move into the second subject. I'm going to talk about what an ideal education might include. So there's a number of points to this. An ideal education, first of all, that's going to also deal with a bias. I think education's purpose is largely to open the door to the student to experience and explore as much of what the world is as possible and what they have inside them as possible, so that as they experience things, they can choose to get interested in certain things or not to be interested in other things. I think that is a big goal for an ideal education, is to provide the student a lot of openings to experience and subjects and ideas so that they can determine what they're going to be interested in. With that in mind, the following elements are a part of an ideal education, something that would get us there, where the student is deciding what he or she wants to do with their life, and they're exploring and they're reaching and they're loving their education because they are following up on subjects and ideas that they are interested in. So, an ideal education would include, in part, an emphasis, and I think this is the very first thing we worry about, on the development of literacy. I talked about it on Facebook last week or 2 weeks ago. Without an ability to read moderately well, it gets very, very hard to learn much of any subject at all. You are reliant then on hands-on experience and on visual aids and other approaches. But most learning usually takes place, at least in part, through some reading, some ingesting by the student of ideas that are written down. It is the most common way to educate. A lack of literacy is a tremendous hindrance on a student. I'm sure it doesn't need to be sold to you, that idea that literacy is critical. If you are educating children, if you are educated yourself, you understand that without an ability to read moderately well, life is going to be pretty tough. So I believe that we should start working in an ideal educational process. We start working with a student at a very young age on literacy. One of the ways to do that, and I have discussed this in other Facebook talks that I did, one of the ways to do that is to start reading to your young children when they're very young, 1 year old, 2 years old. I used to read to my kids every night, and I did it into their teen years. We would read something every night. Of course, what we read grew up with them, so that in their teen years we were reading Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, but we read almost every night. And because of that, both of my children, I think, in part because of that, are very literate, read well, like reading. Both of them write, and that's a part of who they are. So literacy, and there are a lot of ways to develop literacy, and which I discussed in an earlier talk on Facebook, which I invite you to please go listen to if you have the time and you're interested. That has to happen. The next thing that an ideal education develops is critical thinking. Now, there are a lot of ways to define critical thinking. I talked about it again on a Facebook talk. But basically what we're talking about when we talk about developing critical thinking in a student is developing the student's ability to understand something, to read something, to hear something, to study something, understand it, be able to pull information out of what they studied, figure out how to use it, and solve problems with it. One of the big results of education when it's done right is you have a person who is good at solving problems, good at thinking, good at looking at situations, breaking them down, and applying the correct information and answer to them so that they are able to, solve problems. That is the end result of good, well-developed critical thinking skills. And an ideal education should develop those skills. We work very hard in STEPS curriculum to develop those skills, very hard. Every lesson plan has exercises in it after the material that gets studied. And those exercises always consult the student's understanding and what he wants to do with the information for himself and in his own life. So critical thinking is after literacy, the next most important skill set that an education should develop. An education should also develop basic study skills. A student should know how to do research. That is an essential survival skill today, how you research. And it's easy to say, well, you get on the internet and you run a search on Google. Yeah, that is one way to research some things. But there are a lot of ways to do research. And depending on what it is you're trying to figure out, you may need a lot more than what Google or a search engine will provide you as a research tool. So another very good result of a truly ideal education would be a person who knows how to use research, how to use the tools available to them to successfully research, get answers, figure things out. And I think, again, an education that doesn't result in that is a failed education. You don't have a literate person. They're not able to critically think and solve problems. They're not able to do research in order to get the information they need in order to solve problems. I think at that point you have not prepared that student for a lifetime of living. Those are living skills. They are absolute, bottom line, necessary, got to have them skills, and education should develop those skills. It should result in those skills. So the first area in an ideal education involves developing very primary skill sets that the student can use to learn anything they want to learn later on, anything, after their education is done, while they're doing their education. It allows them, because they're literate and they can think and they know how to study and they know how to do research, to take a when you're 40 years old, 50 years old, I want to learn about oil painting. And because you develop those skills, you're literate, you can critically think through a problem and come up with answers. And if you don't have all the information you need, you know how to research and study and get the answers to throw into your critical thinking process and come up with the right answers. If you develop those three skills in education, it almost, and I really want to emphasize almost, doesn't matter what else you do, because you will have a person in your hands who, as they get older, will be effective and able to learn whatever it is they need to learn and whatever it is they choose to learn. So those are really bottom line skills. An ideal education would include obviously more than that, but those are the starting line. You also want to provide in an ideal education hands-on experience with subjects. And that means that the student should be able in some way, shape, or form to actually experience, not just read about, experience a subject. I have never yet run into a subject that could not be experienced on some level. And I know that sounds like it could be impossible. I mean, how do you experience economics? But you do. You experience economics, for instance, by setting up a faux stock market account and letting your student pick stocks and run them for 6 months and see how he does. You experience economics by taking your student to a market and letting him shop and see what things actually cost. And you give him X number of faux dollars and teach him in that way the principle of opportunity cost, that if you spend X number of dollars on A, then you don't have those dollars anymore to buy B or C. So there are hands-on ways to experience economics. There are hands-on ways to experience science, certainly, since science is all about the observation of the physical universe. Take your son outside, your daughter outside at night, and count the stars and start to give them some idea of the size of the universe around them. It is an experiential thing. You can stick them on a telescope. You can send them to the NASA site, which is not quite experiential enough, but is a start in that direction. I have yet to find a subject where there wasn't available some kind of experience that the students could have to get a better and more real idea of that subject. And experiencing something hands-on makes it real, tangible, and accessible to a student. And it's much interest them if the subject is real to them. Another thing that has to be a part of an ideal education is that every subject and every lesson plan has to investigate the relevance of what is being studied to the student, not to the culture, not to your family, not to the civilization, not to the planet, to your student. Your student is the one who's being forced to read and write and spend his time in school and look at all this material. It should be allowed to the student to determine relevance. So, Johnny, you just read about, Alexander the Great in history. Now, if you were Alexander the Great, what would you do once you had conquered an enemy? Because Alexander the Great did one of two things, basically, when he conquered his enemies. He either left them in charge of their own lives with an agreement that they were now part of his empire and moved on, left them with their own government, left them with their own system, left them with a great deal of freedom and moved on, or he burned them to the ground, their entire city and civilization, as he did, with Persepolis, burned them to the ground. So you now put your student, Johnny, in Alexander the Great's shoes, and you say, well, why do you think it would be a good decision to leave them with a great deal of freedom, still running their own government in charge of themselves and move on, or it would be a good decision to raze their city to the ground? And you let the student determine what they think the relevant answer is. In doing so, the student is thinking about history in a way that few people ever do, because they're placing themselves in the middle. They're placing themselves in the middle of history. They are looking at it going, what would I do? If I were there, what would this mean to me? What would be the correct thing to do? And they're being asked to think about their decision and justify it in some way, shape, or form. And there is a justification for anything, for everything. There are justifications, whether they are good justifications or moral justifications. There are justifications. And a student will develop a stronger moral sense and a stronger sense of themselves and their own biases and their own strengths and their own decisions by being allowed to determine the relevance and the usability for them of what they're studying. Johnny is studying geology. Why is that important to Johnny? Johnny should be allowed to decide in every lesson plan on geology why this is important to him. And what you're using in way of curriculum, ideally, would ask him where the relevance is for him and whether or not it's relevant, what he is currently studying in every subject. That is something that STEPS does in every single lesson plan, investigates the relevance of what is being studied on the student's part. The student is asked for the relevance. He's not told why it's relevant. He is asked to determine for himself why it is or is not relevant. I think that makes stronger human beings and makes for a better result in education. Because if the student is deciding that what he's studying is relevant, then he has decided it is relevant to him, and he is far more likely to want to study it, reach into it, look at it, get it, dig in, even attack it himself, which we will talk about more in a little bit. So that is a part of an ideal education, is that the student be allowed to examine and define the relevance of what the student is studying. In the end, and this is important to remember, we're not educating your son or daughter for you. You're not doing it for you. You're not doing it for civilization. You're not doing it for child services or the local school district to make sure that they're happy with how you're educating your child. In the end, your student is the end user of their education. The education is for the student. What they receive has to be able to be used by them, must be valued by them, or they won't use it. It will never be used. An education that isn't valued by the student is irrelevant and wasted because the student is going to dismiss it at the earliest possible age. When we teach a student, force-feeding him to learn subjects that he does not like and never allow him to determine the relevance of those subjects, make them real for him, make them something that he wants, help him decide that he wants them or doesn't want them. When we force educate a child like that, the one thing you can be absolutely certain of is they'll get to an age where they can leave their education, quote unquote, behind them, walk away from it, forget they ever did it, and none of it will have been of use. We all studied subjects when we were young that we didn't care about, that we were forced to study, and that we weren't particularly good at, perhaps. And because back when I was young, I'm 61 years old now, so when I was in school, it was 45 years ago, give or take. Nobody bothered to ever ask me whether I thought that the history and science and mathematics and whatever we were studying was in any way relevant to my life. They didn't care. This was the syllabus. This was what was going to be studied. The entire classroom was going to study this stuff. And it wasn't in my hands to decide that I was or was not interested in the subject. Nobody asked. Nobody cared. That wasn't a part of how education was done. But as a homeschooler, you can care. You should ask your student whether or not a subject is impinging, making sense to them, whether they care. And it doesn't mean that you have to stop teaching that subject because they don't care right now. They may run into an aspect of a subject a little bit up the road that gets their attention. They might hate history until you start studying politics and then go, ooh, I want to be president of the United States, and now we're studying politics. And now you got their attention, and the subject has become useful, has become something that they feel has value to them. Anything the student feels is valuable to him, he will jump at. He'll go at it. He'll want to learn it. And at that point, you have a student who is loving his education instead of having it enforced onto him. So the student is the end user, and part of an ideal education is that we, the educator, and you, the student, remember that. This is for the student. It does not give him the right to not learn. It does not give him the right to be lazy. It does not give him the right to dismiss subjects out of hand. It does not give him the right to not bother to evaluate a subject looking for relevance to him. That the student does not have the right to do. But it does give him the right to decide after a reasonable amount of exposure to a subject that he is or is not interested. And what he is not interested in will become a tremendous waste of time in his education and make his education something he does not enjoy, does not want, and does not see the relevance of. And none of us want to do things with our time that we feel is not relevant to us. Nobody wants to do that. Think about it like an adult. If you were suddenly, you go to work and you come home and somebody met you at your door and said, I'm sorry, but for the next 6 weeks you must study the United States tax code because we have decided that you must fully understand it before you do your taxes. Wow, what would the relevance of that be when you could hand it over to a tax man and have him take care of it in an hour? Why would you want to take 6 weeks of your life to do that unless you want to, unless you looked at it and went, I always wanted to know about the tax code. That's relevant to me. I'm going to go ahead and study it. No adult wants to be told what they have to learn and what they have to study. Neither does your child. It does not mean the child, as I said, has the right to just walk away from their education, walk away from the subject. That is not what I'm saying. That is not what I'm saying. If there are children listening, I am not giving you permission to just say, I hate math, I hate history, I hate science, I'm not going to study any of this. You do not have that right. It is a part of life, and you need to be exposed to these subjects enough that you understand them to some extent and can work with them out there in the real world because they are relevant. But it is up to your education, and it is up to you, the student, to find the relevance. A good curriculum helps with that. STEPS is very helpful with that. It is a big part of what STEPS does. All right. You can also, in an ideal education, focus on the student's agenda. So it would be important in that kind of an education, in an ideal education, to find out what the student does want to learn about. So you're teaching your student all kinds of things, and what he really wants is to learn how to play baseball or build an engine or sew dresses or learn how to dance. All right. As an educator, you are not doing your job if you don't make a real, genuine, and regular effort doing it every 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, because kids' interests change. They come and go. If you're not regularly sitting down with the student saying, well, what do you want to learn? What is your agenda? What are your interests? You're then doing nothing but force-feeding without the student having any real input. And, you're missing a golden opportunity to educate your child. So this is something schools can't do, but an ideal education, which we can do as home educators, is capable of doing. So you have a kid and he wants to learn to build an engine. Intern him at the local shop. Let him work there for 4 weeks in, 2-3 hours a day as a part of his school time. Count it as a part of his school time. It's what he wants to learn right now. Make it a part of his education. He will love doing his education at that point because he'll be learning what he wants to learn. So there are phases that a student passes through in each subject that are a part of an ideal education. They kind of go like this. First phase, the student is exposed to many subjects. And as an educator, this is one of your most important jobs. It is one of the most important jobs a curriculum could help you with. Expose the student to many subjects, not just history, but history related to economics and politics and religion and art and all kinds of things. You want a child exposed to many, many subjects because you don't know what he will be interested in until he's interested. You're looking for the light to turn on in his eyes as he studies chemistry and he gets to, biological chemistry, and the light comes on. He says, oh, wow, that's how that works. You're looking for the student to decide what he's interested in, and to get there, the first phase is exposure to as many subjects as possible and with some reasonable depth, always allowing the student to assess as he goes the relevance of what he's studying to him. The next phase is once the student goes, yes, wow, I am interested in blah. The next phase is find ways to reshape your educational program to some extent, the number of hours being spent in the day, lean them towards his interest. The kind of experiences the student is having as a part of education, lean them towards his interest. If it's building a car engine, like I said, take 3 hours out of the 6 you are forcing your kid to do as part of his education, and intern him at a local shop, and those 3 hours are about what he wants to learn. He may find that after a month of that, he hates building car engines, and it's back to phase 1, exposure to many subjects looking for whatever he's interested in. Believe me when I tell you, and I know parents, you already know this, that happens. Kids get interested in something and they get uninterested in something. But when they are interested, A good educator who has the flexibility and freedom to do it makes sure that the student gets exposed to as much of that subject as possible in depth. So this second phase is a matter of degree, more depth, more detail, more hands-on experience, whatever the subject is. They're interested in astronomy, take them to an observatory. They're interested in fish, take them to the ocean and take them to, some kind of a pier and take them somewhere where they can see fish. So, and really talk to a scientist maybe who does that for a living. So now your student has been interested in the subject for a while, and we see phase number 3 kick in. What is phase number 3? The student takes on the study himself. He insists. He looks for ways to learn more. He demands books. He demands experiences. He does the research and decides where he needs to go and what he needs to do to learn more about the subject. And parents, when you arrive at that phase, phase 3, when you get there, you have hit the educational jackpot. Think of it for yourself. In your own education, adults, as you were growing up, there were subjects that you hated. I know I hated math, for instance. I didn't like it. I like it a lot more now than I did when I was young. But there were subjects I really didn't like, and there were subjects that absolutely were magical to me, and I ended up doing those things because I was allowed to investigate them when I was young. My parents did not get in my way of exploring those things, and in some ways were helpful. Even the schools I went to allowed me to learn more about writing, learn more about theater, learn about filmmaking, learn about music, learn about composing. I learned about those things largely on my own, but also because I was allowed to. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said, well, son, you need to spend that extra 3 hours in math. Nobody made me do that. Now, I was a pretty good student, so I kind of bought my time, my free time, by finishing schoolwork quickly. But that should not have been necessary, and your students should not have to do that. Whatever their real interests are as they get older and they express interest, even at a young age, they should be allowed to take some of that educational time and energy and resource and use it to explore and discover what they want. And when they start deciding what sort of experiences they need to know more about that subject, I need to read this book, I need to go to this observatory, I need the jackpot. Absolutely the jackpot. They have taken on the responsibility and the energy for their own education in a subject they want to know about, and that phase is the jackpot. There's only one other phase after that, and it involves a continuous assessment of the student's interests. Now, you will note, I did not say the student's progress. I said the student's interests. We're not going to, if a student wants to build cars, and he's interning, and he's loving it, and he's learning about it, the only test for that is, can he build a car? And that will happen with time if that's what he really wants. He's interning, he's in the right place, the exposure and experience has been made available to the student, and now you just keep your eyes open as an adult, as a parent, as an educator. And a month later, are they still energized? Are they interested? Is there a little bit of a lag? Is there something else they need to continue to learn about that subject that they're not getting? But you're also looking for, I tried this, Mom, Dad, I tried it, and I really decided I don't like it. I don't want my hands to be covered in grease all day, every day, and blah, 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 blah. The student is allowed to change his mind, and Mom and Dad, that is regardless of your investment in their experience. You may have invested $82,690 in turning them and building a Fiat, and they got into it, and by the way, that would be foolish. They got into it, and 5 days into the experience, they decided they didn't want to build a Fiat. So, a certain amount of reason goes into this process. My daughter, when she was in her mid-teens, wanted to learn to play guitar, so I bought her a good guitar. I shouldn't have. I should have bought her a mediocre and inexpensive guitar, and I bought her lessons with a good teacher, And she was interested for about 4 or 5 months, and then she wasn't interested anymore. She still plays a little bit, but the interest wasn't there to make a life out of it. So she, continued to teach herself and play off and on from time to time, and she is interested in music, but not in that way. How did she discover she wasn't interested in it enough to go the distance? She tried it out, hands-on. We focused a part of the time her education was allotted each day to some musical experiences. And she discovered for herself that was not what she was interested in. So a continuous assessment at a distance, Mom and Dad, at a distance of the student's interest. You can always just ask little Johnny, hey, are you still interested in building cars? And he hopefully will give you an honest answer and say, I'm loving it, or I'm less interested than I was a month ago, but I want to keep going. Or I really hate it and I don't want to do it, in which case, where do you go? Back to phase 1. You're looking again for something that really gets your students' interest and attention. All right, so those phases in an ideal education and in homeschool, boy, you can really see them happen because you only have 1 or 2 or 3 students. You can see each student going through those phases in a subject. They get exposed to the subject. They get interested in a particular subject and are allowed to have more experience in it. They then are provided lots of experience in it, and they can decide based on that experience, is this for them? Some students just keep right on going with those subjects, and that becomes their livelihood, their life, their interests in life. And an education that ends up in somebody who's very capable in doing what they love is a very successful education. Okay, so Linz is on the line now. Can I talk to her? All right, so we're going to unmute the phone. I'm going to talk to Linz, and then I hope I'm going to talk to Russ and Alex, who are also...
All callers are muted. All callers are unmuted.
So, Lindsay there?
Yes.
Oh, good. Hi, how are you?
I am excellent. How are you?
I am good, thank you. I'm very glad to get to talk to you. So we're just talking about how home education allows somebody the freedom to let their student experience things they're interested in. Have you had experience with that?
Well, I was just listening to you, and I had this experience on Monday, as a matter of fact. We are a part of a fine arts co-op that is offering Spanish classes, and the parents are allowed to sit in free on the classes, and I want to learn Spanish, so I signed up to sit in free. So I went to the half-price bookstore to get myself an English to Spanish dictionary, like the teacher said I needed. And while we were there, my 11-year-old daughter found a Teach Yourself Japanese book with a workbook and a CD that goes along with it. And she's been wanting to learn Japanese forever. And so she asked if she could get it. And I said, sure. And since Monday, she has learned how to count to 10 in Japanese completely on her own because she wants to speak Japanese.
Oh, that's so great. Well, it's one of those things where you don't know until you know what your student is interested in.
Yep, absolutely.
In the end, the student is going to tell you, or you're going to have your eyes open, as you obviously did. And
the more you expose them to different things, the more ideas they will get about things that they might like.
Yeah, that's right. How old is your daughter?
She is 11.
Okay. And right now, what do you think her favorite subjects are at this time? What does she enjoy?
She really loves science. She says that she doesn't like history because there's so much war.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't like all the wars, but she very much likes history class. She just really hates all the wars. And art.
One thing you might tell her is that the reason we study wars so that we won't have to have them. If we understand what starts them, we can avoid them.
Absolutely.
And you can tell her, for me, I hate war, and it was my least favorite part of studying history as well, and that was exactly why I studied history.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and that is what I tell her.
Yep, I'm sure. What does she really not like studying right now?
She despises math, which is heartbreaking for me because I am a big math person. I used to homeschool my son, who's now a junior in high school, and he and I both loved math, and we had a great time doing math, and I was so looking forward to her enjoying math, but she just doesn't get it.
What kind of math is she studying right now?
We've tried several different curriculums. I can't find anything that works. I ended up going and buying an old textbook that's just like straight up math. You know, it starts with integers and goes through, you know, fractions, decimals, area, perimeter, everything. So we're gonna start again at the beginning.
Can I make a suggestion, maybe? That
Absolutely.
may or may not be of any use. There is a very, very old, out-of-print economics textbook for young students. I talk about it somewhere on the site, and I have your email address, so I'll send you the name of the book. I'm sure you could buy it on the Internet for $5. It's great because it's totally practical application of basic math. Every chapter, it's like how to shop for tires is one of the chapters, and it has to do with comparative pricing, and there are chapters dealing with fractions and chapters that deal with integers, but in very pragmatic ways. And because it's so hands-on, students, I found for me, when I looked at it, I thought, wow, I wish I'd had this book. I think it's been out of print for 40 years.
That sounds perfect. Because that's her problem. It's so conceptual and theoretical that she thinks it's really hard. And I keep trying to tell her it's not hard. It's easy. Just don't think so much. But she can't. She's trying to make it real, and it's very confusing. So, yeah, that sounds perfect.
I totally understand how she feels. That was my problem with math, exactly. When I went to junior high and high school, you know, I hated algebra because nobody bothered to ever explain to me that there was a practical application. And if taught with that in mind, there's a great algebra book called Algebra Unplugged. Again, it's old. I think it's 35 years old, and it isn't a textbook, but it explains algebra in extremely practical ways. And I looked at it 3 or 4 years ago, and I almost thought about building a curriculum around it because it's so great. So it's
I've often been slightly disappointed that there was no math curriculum.
I know. Well, I'm not enough of a math guy to write a math curriculum, and there's so many good math programs. But these two books were so practical that you could easily use them to teach a kid who wants more hands-on and less theory, you know. Hello?
Hello. Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Can you hear me?
So yes, I do. So I'll send you the names of those two books in an email, and I recommend them highly for math because I think I'm a guy who doesn't like math, and I read them and I suddenly liked math. It was suddenly very real for me.
Well, that's great because, people say often, algebra at all today, and I always say, yes, you did. You used algebra a whole bunch. You just didn't even know it.
Yeah, that's right. Every day. That's right.
Every day.
Mm-hmm. What other subjects does she not love, do you think?
Really only math. She tends to do very well in all her other subjects. We don't do a lot of spelling because I figure that comes along with just all the regular writing that we do. Like, we have the spelling program that you have. And it works great. I mean, you learn how to spell just by writing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we do the science and the creative writing program through steps. Well, what used to be Connects the Thoughts. When I first found you guys, it was Connects the Thoughts.
That's right.
We're finishing up her history curriculum that we've been using since first grade. But once we finish that, we're going to move into the upper school history curriculum that you have. That I had ordered for my son previously. So she'll start with that next year.
Wonderful.
Probably in January.
Well, yeah, it's a great adventure. She's exactly the right age to start the Step 4 stuff, which is the old upper school stuff. So 11, 12, 13 is a great age to start that curriculum. She sounds like she's really very literate. Is that correct?
She is very literate. Well, and that's something she hates, though. She hates reading for pleasure. She does not read for pleasure. She doesn't mind reading in class. She doesn't mind, anything like that. She's a great reader. She, we do acting. I teach drama at her fine arts co-op, and, she acts. Well, yeah, and I know you have a theater background as well.
Yeah.
But reading for pleasure is not something that she is into at all.
I'm going to send you something that may help with that.
Well, excellent. Well, we're about to start Animal Farm. We're about to do an Animal Farm unit, and I'm hoping that maybe that'll spark some interest for her, because we're getting real close to World War II in our history curriculum. So,
Animal Farm was the first play I ever did as an actor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I was like, the first professional play. When I was 9, I think, I did Animal Farm. I played Napoleon, the dictator.
That's a good role.
Yeah, type passed for it, and the other actors were all 15 years older than me. I was this obnoxious kid that the director, for some strange reason, cast in that role. But that book is quite an experience, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It is. Well, I'm a big 1984 fan. I hadn't read Animal Farm until just last summer, ever. I've read 1984 over and over again. So it was a very different take on similar themes that I was palatable for her cognitive ability right now. And those themes are always important.
Yeah, it's a great choice. I mean, it deals with, obviously, fascism and political ideas, but it's a fantasy, and it's short. It isn't a hard read. It's a very short book. And,
right, like a fable.
Yeah, like a fable, very much so. Well, that's a wonderful choice. I'm going to send you one of our lit guides. I'll attach it to the email. And take a look at it and see if it's something that she might enjoy the process of, that book she's reading more fun for her.
Right.
All right. Well, do you have any questions for me that I can answer you about steps or about home education?
I don't have any questions. I just, I'm thrilled to be able to speak with you. I searched for years for a secular science course that was comprehensive and that taught science. And I found one, and I was so grateful when I found it, and it's just been the greatest thing for us. Because it's very. I'm in Texas. It's very difficult to find anything that is secular and science together.
Where in Texas are you?
I'm in Dallas. You would think it would be easier in Dallas, but no.
No. But you're not anywhere near the hurricane.
Oh no.
Let me do it.
No, we're good here. My in-laws live at the coast. Their house is fine, but they can't get home. They're stuck up here for now. But yes, thank God, everyone I know is fine.
Oh, good, very good. Well, the secular science thing. The reason I wrote secular science courses for homeschool was that there weren't any. And I needed them for my kids. There weren't any. And non-secular science, I'm sorry, is basically nonsense. And
right. No, that's not science.
No, it's not science. And I think that you can teach science in a way that is respectful of people's belief systems, but it has to be secular science.
Right.
You can nod at other people's beliefs and say, this is what people who believe this believe, but this is the secular science. This is what you learn.
Right.
And I wrote
it's about empirical data.
That's right. It all has to be experienced. That's what science is all about. And I wrote it because I needed it for my 2 children. I didn't have any way to teach them science.
Yep. Well, and I definitely recommend to anyone who's listening who's thinking of doing the science course, do the basics course first because it really gets the kids in the right mindset of what is expected from them in the future classes. It gets them thinking about observation and and I think it's very important. I've actually passed scientifics on to several people whose kids are in public school who just don't really know how to think about science properly. So I've been like, hey, read this. This might help you.
Well, I really appreciate that. That's wonderful. Thank you. Well, Lynn, thank you very much for coming on, and always around the Facebook group answering questions, and I'm easy to get a hold of. And I've been an educator for a long time looking for alternative ways to educate that actually work, obviously. I made a point of throwing away everything that public schools do because none of it works, and coming up with other things. A lot of them are quite old. A lot of what I use is 2,000 years old. It goes back to Plato.
That's you know what, it works.
Because it worked. It goes back to Plato and Confucius and other people, and they were great educators, and there's something to be learned.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you for having me. Now, is there a place where we can, is this being recorded and broadcast? Is it available for streaming? Is there a way for me to go back and listen? Because I missed the first part. I had to pick my daughter up from somewhere.
No, I totally understand. Also, we're working on recording it and uploading it, and I hope that works. If not, I'll be doing this again soon.
Okay, well, let me know.
I will. I appreciate it.
All right,
very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I think if Russ and Alex are around now, they should be around now.
We are around.
Oh, good. Hi, Russ. How are you?
Hi. I didn't know if you knew we connected or not, and I certainly didn't want to interrupt.
I have absolutely no information. I'm talking blind here.
Okay. Well, we've been listening in for a little bit.
Are you alone, or do you have Alex with you?
Yeah, he's here too.
I'm here.
Hey, Alex, how are you?
Good.
Good. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves so people listening will know who you are, and how old Alex is.
Okay, my name is Russ Person. I'm Alex's father, and I've been homeschooling him ever since I was pretty convinced that he started to want to learn to read, and that just came out of my love for my child and what I thought I could do for him.
Hi, I'm Alex Person, and I'm 11 years old. I've been homeschooling since I was 3.
Wow. You guys talk a little bit about the wonderful things that Alex is doing and his goals and all of which kind of, you've discovered while you've been going through his education. He's kind of shaped his goals, and they're pretty great. So why don't you share a little of that?
Well, I always thought that the problems and the blessings that we have are generational. So in my case, I was a well-educated child, but I was never really asked about what kind of work and how I wanted to spend my adult life. And my parents were very supportive of education, but they didn't offer a lot of guidance, and they didn't require it. I have required that from Alex, but several years ago I asked him to think about what he'd like to do with his life, and surprisingly, within about a day, he told me he wanted to become an engineer. Which I had suggested very gently that he might want to become a writer because I respect writers so much. But I felt like engineering was a practical avocation, so I encouraged that. And for the last 3 years, we've done the things that will prepare him to hopefully get a master's degree in engineering and create something wonderful for all of us to benefit from.
Alex, what do you like about the idea of engineering?
I thought I was pretty good at math, and I thought that would be a pretty good decision. I also knew that the pay was pretty well, and I liked the background. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What do you see? What do you think engineering is in your mind? What is it about, and how do you get there?
I think it's a little bit about designing, but mostly about making stuff cheaper and also more effective.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And what brought you to that? How did you decide that? Because those are great ideas as how to use engineering. But how did you decide that?
Well, I just thought first I eliminated like the arts and stuff because I'm not too good at that. So I had it mostly down to science or engineering. And then I just kind of looked into math and found engineering and liked it. So
Interesting. Do you remember what you were looking at when you decided engineering was it? That was what you liked? What were you looking at or studying?
I think I just Googled jobs in the mathematical field, and that's how I found it.
Oh, so cool. So cool. So how old are you again, Alex? You're 11?
Yes.
Okay. And you're just homeschooling, right, pretty much?
Yeah.
Okay. And what is your plan now as far as continuing your education? Because I know Russ has told me some things, and you guys are looking at the next few steps, right?
Yeah.
So what do you guys see as where you go next?
Well, we're going to be homeschooling for the next couple of years, and then I'll be taking some courses at the local college.
Oh, good. 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 Have you scouted out the colleges to see which ones have what you need?
Yeah. We're just taking the community college.
Good. Well, you may be starting that as early as age 14 or 15 if they allow it. And so a community college should be able to provide at least the beginnings of a college experience for you, and that's a good place to start.
They actually have a 12-year-old requirement. I found out.
You have to be
12 years old.
Hey, he could go next year.
Well, I get way. I'm a person that projects things into the future to perhaps great of an extent. I try to see a step in his life going forward. I have a 10-year plan. That's very flexible, of course, and he can still change what he wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm learning about all the options as much as I can every week and adapting his education to put him in the best position possible to compete favorably with all the other students that have the same goals eventually. I think one of Alex's advantages is that he can prepare for what he wants to do years in advance of what most of the students are doing. So he can study the proper subjects, he can study them in depth, and of course get a good liberal arts background as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now you guys are using some STEPS curriculum, right? I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he's he's in STEPS 4, and he's currently studying science and history in STEPS.
Is that going okay?
Yeah. We alternate. One day he does science, and the other day he does history.
That's a good way to do that. Usually with Step 4, we say that you should do history almost every day, and you should do science 2 to 3 times a week. But that's because there's so much history. But Alex is very young, so he has endless time to get through that history, and there's no reason for him to alternate days. So, Alex, how are you doing with that history and science? Does it help you?
Yes, it does. I've learned quite a lot from CTT for STEPS.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's all right. Don't worry about it. You can call it whatever you're used to calling it. It doesn't matter. It's the same curriculum. Yeah. So what science are you looking at now? Which course? No, I couldn't hear you. Have you started?
Geology.
Really? Cool. Well, you only have so many school hours in the day. How many hours do you guys usually spend in a school day?
I'd say probably around 5 to 6 hours.
That's about right.
That's about right for step 4, 5 to 6 hours a day. And so you're spending, about an hour each day on either history or science? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, around that amount of time.
And how much math are you doing every day?
About the same, an hour or so.
That can vary. Sometimes it's at least 2 hours, but
that makes sense.
It kind of depends. For math, this year, and we started a little bit towards the end of last year, he's working with a tutor twice a week. And that's been a real help.
What kind of math are you studying right now? Are you into algebra yet, or are you still in pre-algebra?
I took an Algebra 2 course last year, but we went back to Algebra 1 to strengthen it before I go to the local college.
Wow. Well, listen, I did Algebra 1 when I was 16. I was a straight A student until I did it, and I hated it so much I failed because I avoided the class. I kept ditching out to go to rehearsals because I was an actor and a writer. And then I had it again in summer school, and I knew I had to pass. So I worked like a dog. I did not love it, and I got a B. And the teacher, who knew me very well, sat me down at the end of the semester and said, "So are you going to continue in math?" And I looked at her, and I said, "No." And she said, "Good." She was a good teacher. She understood that this was not for me, and it is for you because you obviously are doing very well with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's been kind of a current event in the state of California, too, because both the California State Universities and the community colleges were finding out that a lot of students simply were not graduating because of what's considered an intermediate algebra course.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of discussion that most people just don't need that. And there's a lot of people in technical fields that say that they don't use it. It's kind of something that you need as a basis for other math later that they occasionally is the truth about the whole thing. But it's not important enough to keep people from graduating, that's for sure, especially in other fields.
I agree. Colleges and universities are forced to teach general ed classes for 2 years or so because lower schools, high schools, junior highs, middle schools, whatever, failed in teaching the essentials in those areas, math, language skills. They have no choice in a way. The problem is they're not looking at the individual student and determining whether that student got the basics and does not need 2 years of additional basics courses. If a college would do that, they would take a student like Alex and skip the 2 years of general ed and get him into his discipline, the thing he wants to learn, which would be better for him.
They do some placement tests, but only in, I believe, writing and math.
That's right. And even that, it's only used marginally to determine what could be skipped and what has to be done. They don't have a terrific way to evaluate. If a student comes to a college that's a homeschooler, the likelihood is that they're more literate and they're better educated than a student coming from a private public school. That's what testing tells us. All the tests that they give show homeschoolers in the top percentiles in every subject because they receive a better education. I think your son is a classic example of that. You've done a great job. He's doing a great job, and he's really kind of focusing in on what he's interested in and doing a wonderful job with it. He will be better prepared for advanced education than almost anybody they get, and that is a beautiful thing.
Well, thank you. That's, I think, my role as his father, not to leave the mothers out of this, because they're about 99% of the homeschool parents, but I always kind of felt like fathers were the ones that were thinking about their children being successful in the world and dealing with things. But that's from a father's perspective, so I see everything that way. But my job I see with my own child is to prepare him for life. And some of your courses have created a situation where we have had dialogue that is very helpful, like living your life in elementary level. I tell parents that have children that age absolutely do this because it'll guide you and to have the kind of discussions that you know that you need to have with your children in a positive way, in a thorough way.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I wrote those in order to those living your life courses for step 2 in particular, even in step 1, are meant to start discussions about very important life decisions and skills that you can most certainly start to decide about when you're 6 and 7 years old. There's no reason not to. And those courses develop literacy as well in step 2. So 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds can do them. I've had 14 and 15-year-olds do those courses and have huge successes with them because they needed to develop literacy, but because they also address issues that we all have to address. Doesn't matter how old we are.
That's true. I don't see them as being locked into a certain age range.
Yeah,
and I can remember some of the material very specifically.
So, Russ, I was just about to start talking about using admiration instead of critique in education, and you and I have talked about that. How are you using, I haven't explained this yet, but the idea basically is, as a tool in education, of an ideal education, you get rid of critique. You get rid of grades and report cards and student critiques and evaluations. You get rid of all that stuff. And you focus on precision admiration, finding things in your students' work that are wonderful and letting them know that they're wonderful and encouraging the student to do more of that rather than browbeating and critiquing and telling him he's wrong and, hey, you're not doing your math as well as Bobby who lives next door. All of that stuff is destructive and useless. You and I have talked about this. How are you integrating admiration into what you guys are doing?
Well, I would say that it's been a challenge for me, probably because most of us came from a background where we did receive a considerable amount of criticism in the name of guidance.
Yep, me too.
And I still have to check myself, but Alex is the best test for all that because, especially in math, I've seen him essentially kind of lock his mind up if he feels like I'm getting critical or not focusing on whatever he's doing that's well. And kind of the joke is I'll have to go back to what 2 and 2 is because his mind just shuts down and isn't able to function the way it would normally. So I can attest that it's not easy. I've seen a lot of other parents get quite a bit more uptight than I have. So I'll say that I came from a position of not being the worst, but it's been a learning lesson for me, and it continues. And on my off time, Alex is taking over a lot of his education now, and I'm more or less supervising and having discussions in addition to his work. I have a chance to think about where I can integrate that. If I'm checking work, if I'm going over it, I know that I have to always comment on what he's done very well and just suggest that he might need to review something in particular because he needs to learn it better.
Yep. When I was raising my children and educating them, I had not at that point made the determination between admiration and critique. It hadn't entered my thinking until I started home educating them and looking at throwing out all the tools of standard education were really destructive. I had to make a conscious decision to work on admiring their work rather than critiquing it, and I was not always successful. I was very often not successful at it. And I think just to that extent, I did not help my kids get an education and get excited about what they were learning. And to the extent that I was able to admire their work, I admired their writing, I admired their artwork. They're actors and writers, What you admire is what you're going to get out of your kids. And if you admire their wonderful work, you'll get wonderful work.
That's true.
Yeah, I struggled with it too. I still struggle with it when I teach. I still want to occasionally, tell a student where he can take his math or science, and you can't do it because it doesn't help. What helps is to find something they did that did work and admire it, and then you'll get more of that.
That's right.
Well, thank you guys for coming on. Do you have anything else you want to ask or talk about before I move on?
That I'd say would be the most important concept, but in general, I would want to encourage anyone to just have discussions with their children about what they see out in the world, what might make them happy in their life, and encourage them to do that, and then go out there in the world, go online, and find opportunities for them to excel in it. What I've done is already looking to find people that can mentor Alex. I really believe in the idea of first, where he can shadow other engineers and find out what they like, what they didn't like, what was important in their education. And hopefully by the time he's in school, he can actually be able to comment from a first-hand experience what it's like to work in different fields of engineering, rather than the classical, hey, he's a college boy and he doesn't know anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely right. I think that's very wise of you. Well, good. Thank you guys very, very much. Thank you very much for coming on. And yes, I agree with that. I love the idea of mentoring and interning in a specialized area with somebody who actually knows the area. I think that's a great idea. Great idea.
Good.
All right, you guys. Well, I hope to speak to you soon. And if I'm going to move on now. If anybody else has any question for who's listening, right now the mute is turned off. We're going to turn it on again in a minute. But if anybody else is on board and wants to ask me a question, now would be the time. Okay, no? All right. So let's put the mute back on, and I'm going to keep talking for the next half hour or so, and then we'll be done. So we were talking about an ideal education, and I was just getting into admiration versus critique. What schools generally do is do a lot of testing, do a lot of evaluating of the students, and a lot of critique. Grading, grade levels, all of it is a form of critique. And critique is pretty destructive of a student. What you get your hand slapped for is probably what you don't ever want to do again. We're talking about creating a wonderful experience in education for a child. And we want that child to reach and want things that education can provide them. And when we critique a child, we cut their reach. We stop it. We slap them on the wrist. We say, no, you didn't do that right. Don't reach for that. You can't have it. And at that point, we're working against what education should accomplish, what it should do. Education should encourage reach. Education should insist on reach from the student. We want students to be interested in lots of things. That way, they're more likely to find the thing or things that they will carry with them through the rest of their lives, the professions and the fun stuff that they are interested in and they will do. So, critique cuts reach. It works against the purposes of a good education. Admiration encourages reach. It's hard to do. You and I, Mom and Dad, were probably raised, if we went to public schools or private schools, in a critique-rich educational environment. I had my hand literally smacked with a ruler in 4th grade by my math teacher who didn't like the way I had solved the problem. As I recall, even though I had the problem right, she didn't like the work that I had done to get there. And I think pretty much from that time forward, I didn't like math very much, and it took me being an adult for decades before I started to get any real interest in math again. Kids are kids. They are not adults. They are more vulnerable than most adults. And even adults don't like having their hands slapped. You know, you go to work, you do something at your job, and your boss comes in and says, "No, you dummy, you didn't do that right. What the hell is wrong with you?" And at that point, you don't want to be there as an employee, as somebody trying to create something at that job. You don't want any part of that job anymore. You want to go away. So critique is a guaranteed method of cutting somebody's interest, stopping it, making them withdraw from subjects, from possible interests. It is not a part of education. It is a part of authoritarianism. And some educators believe that the educator should be up there on a pedestal and be an authoritarian figure. That's all very nice and well good. That comes from Germany in the 1920s, and that system was imported into the United States at that time for all kinds of bad reasons, and it's very, very destructive. So I would ask you to consider admiration in as opposed to critique, and I do mean in as opposed to critique, as a part of education. Also, another part of an ideal education is that whatever the subject is that is being studied, the difficulty of it continues to increase, and it builds on what has already been learned. So a student learns the basics in a subject, and we do this in steps with every subject. When you start studying science in steps, we start by defining what science is. We start by defining the elements of science. I think Lynn's was talking about this earlier, observation, things like that, which are a part of science. So you start with basics, with essentials, with stuff that you must know and understand and be able to work with in order to learn the more difficult parts of that subject later. And then you get more details, and then you get more details, and you get deeper concepts and bigger concepts. But it's cumulative, and it grows. In an ideal education, the materials you're studying, the subjects you're studying, grow in detail and complexity, and your ability to understand them grows with the material because you learned ideally step by step as you've gone. Another aspect of an ideal education is knowing which subject you're studying and not getting in the way. Now, this is something Lynn's did talk about. Let's say your student is studying creative writing. They want to write, and they write you a short story, and they're excited about it, and they give it to you. I actually had two parents come to me. This truly happened, folks. I had a mom and dad come to me and say, our son was writing a novel, and one day he just stopped. It was great, and he just stopped. And I asked them how they were helping him, and they said, oh, well, we're correcting his spelling, and we're correcting his syntax, the way he lays out his sentences, and we're giving him ideas, and we're helping him in 100 ways. And I just shook my head, and I said, well, if you want your son to get back to writing that novel, you need to go to him and eat crow. Apologize for quote-unquote helping. Creative writing has nothing to do with spelling. Creative writing has very little to do with syntax. And the reality is that a young writer will get better and better and better at spelling and syntax, the construction, proper construction of sentences, as they get older and write more and read more and write more and read more. These things will improve of themselves. But if you insist on reading something creative that your son or daughter hands you and correcting their spelling, correcting their syntax, telling them how they could have written that story better, you have injected into that creative writing project things that have nothing to do with it. Spelling is not a part of creative writing. It is a separate subject. It should be isolated. What we advise people to do is in everything that your student is studying during the week, as they write their essays and they write about what they're doing, look for misspelled words, make a list, and at the end of the week, give them a short, 5 words, 10 words, spelling list of words that the student misspelled because they tried to use that word. They wanted to use that word and did not spell it correctly. That way, that spelling list consists only of words the student is trying to use and wants to use in their work. That way, their spelling list is not arbitrary. It isn't decided by some guy in Washington who decided that all second graders in their fourth week of their second semester should know this following list of 20 words and how to spell them, which is completely nonsense and arbitrary. But spelling has nothing to do with creative writing. And if you stop and slow down a student who is working on creative writing with spelling and syntax and other considerations, same thing is true in every single subject. Student writes a great essay about history, you correct his spelling, or you say, well, you got the history right, but you mentioned math here and the math is wrong. Boy, you are not helping your student when you do that. You've injected absolutely irrelevant factors into what they're trying to do. And finally, very important to successful education, is that the student develops an increasing level of responsibility for their own education's success. We know as educators, homeschoolers, educators anywhere, when the student takes the bit, when the student grabs a subject and runs with it on their own because they're enjoying it, their eyes are lit up, this is something that works for them, they want to know more, they are running with it, their responsibility for learning that subject has been assumed. They have taken the responsibility. They have decided it's time to learn that subject. They want it. Jackpot, educational jackpot. That's a kid who has started to grow up and take responsibility for his own work and has found something that has interested him. That is a key part of a successful education. So real quickly in review, key parts of successful education, an emphasis on literacy, critical thinking, and the development of study skills so that the student can learn anything. Hands-on experience with subjects, that goes back to what Alex and his dad were just talking about with mentors and interning and stuff like that. That's a great way to get hands-on experience in a subject you're interested in. Keep the agenda and the studies and the curriculum as much about what the student's interests are as possible, so the student wants his education, is reaching for it because he's studying things he wants to study. Be aware of those 4 phases that each subject goes through as it's being studied by the student. Phase 1, that the student is exposed to many, many subjects. Phase 2, that he finds something he is interested in and you focus part of his education on just that subject and try to create wonderful situations where the student can experience that. Phase 3, the student takes control of that subject and responsibility for it and is moving on their own. And Phase 4, a continuous assessment from a distance of the student's continued interest in that subject. Another aspect of that kind of an education is admiration versus critique. Admiring your students' work, finding something, anything, worth admiring in their work rather than critiquing it and cutting their interest and their reach in that particular subject and in the work they did. Increasing difficulty in the studies, starting with basics, moving into more complicated concepts. That's a very important part of successful education if we're going to get to those complicated subjects, aspects of subjects. And remember, folks, it takes time. Don't expect a 7-year-old to give you an answer about science or history that a 15-year-old who's been studying those subjects for 8 years in an intelligent way is going to give you. They can't. They won't. They don't have the information. What they have is what they have. And the information they have is what provides the answer to the questions in earlier steps, for instance, in our curriculum. Step 1 and Step 2 is for younger kids. So the answers you're going to get from young kids are going to be based on what they have studied and what they do understand. They will learn more. Do not look for incredibly comprehensive, brilliant answers at a very young age. If you get them, wonderful, but don't expect them. So you want the studies to become increasingly difficult and complex and your student to be right on top of them and know what he's doing. Remove the non-essentials from what is being done. Don't, for instance, correct spelling and syntax, grade writing, stuff like that, and the student assuming increasing levels of responsibility. Now imagine if all that happened in your child's education. Well, goodness, they're going to be reaching for their education, studying ever more complicated materials, taking responsibility for those things, wanting their education, reaching for their education with basic skills in place like literacy and research skills and critical thinking, which is absolutely the bottom line important skill here with literacy. They're going to soar. That's a student who is going to go out and conquer the world. They can learn any subject well, and once they get interested, they will not be able to be stopped. Those are all the parts of an ideal education. Now, I'm going to talk for a few minutes about STEPS curriculum particularly, because STEPS was written to help create an ideal education. It helps develop all of those things that I just laid out, made a list of, as part of a wonderful education. STEPS is a series of over 300 courses, K through 12. It is secular, but it is religion-friendly. We never attack a religion, and we talk a great deal in history about the history of religions and their beliefs and practices, because we believe that a student should understand all major religions, understand them, not be indoctrinated, understand them. So when the student is exposed to these things in life, the student knows what they are and is not afraid of them. The student understands Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, understands them, and knows what he or she is looking at. So we are secular, and we're entirely secular. We don't indoctrinate anything. We have secular science. We're a secular curriculum, K through 12, but we are religion-friendly. We have courses in history, science, all the way K through 12, by the way. These are all K through 12. History, science, creative writing, reading, and then as they get older, spelling programs, current events, civics, and we have United States civics, but we also have a course called All-Purpose Civics, which is for your city, your state, or a country you're in that doesn't happen to be the United States. And you can use All-Purpose Civics to do a full civic study of any place. But we do have a specific course for United States civics. We have a lot of arts courses, including animation, acting, music, and music history. We pretty much have everything but math and foreign language. Now, we are not, STEPS is not Common Core or any standards compliant. I'm going to explain why. Common Core are the list of standards put out by the federal government that public schools must abide by. If they had their way, private schools and private educators would be forced to abide by these standards too. And what they basically say is in second grade, in week 4, a student should study Columbus and biology, some aspect of biology, cut a frog open. And in the next week, they should study, ancient Egypt and blah. The ideas behind Common Core are really, really bad, very destructive, very not workable. History, as we teach it in STEPS, should be taught on the timeline. A student should learn everything that happened in order, so it has a sequence to it and makes sense. You don't want to teach history jumping around history. You want to teach it in sequence. Otherwise, the student doesn't get the significance of things. Why a certain activity is important because it took all this time to get there. What led up to certain things. And we're not just talking about wars, because wars are a very small part, well, they're a big part of history, but they're not the most important part of history. We're talking about economics and politics and arts and religion and nations and how they developed and all kinds of things. History should be taught on the timeline. It rarely is. And it is not taught that way in public schools. It is rarely taught that way in private schools, and it is always taught that way in STEPS. STEPS consists of, and we do the same thing with science, by the way. We build up. We start with science basics, which explains what science is and what the basic tools of science are, like observation and measurement, and then we build up from there into the observable sciences, earth sciences like geology and oceanography. And from there we get into biology and physics and chemistry and the rest of it. So there are 4 steps in STEPS curriculum, 4 steps. Step 1 is for very young students, ages 5 and 6, who are pre-literate. They do not read, or they read very little. Step 1 is teacher intensive. It really requires that the home educator really be there at all times, and the courses are actually kind of scripts where each lesson plan is totally laid out, and the teacher is told to do this, then do that, do this, then do that with the student, and that is how we teach them. But we teach 5 and 6-year-olds, we start teaching them reading. We also really do teach them some history. We really do teach them some science. We really do get them creative writing even before they can write. There are ways to do that. So that is step 1, and it is for pre-literate students, very teacher-intensive. Step 2 is for usually students 7 and 8, students who are developing literacy of any age. And as I mentioned earlier, we've had 12, 13, 14-year-olds do step 2 and really, really win with it, really succeed. Their literacy improved, but above and beyond that, the courses are challenging, and they teach real history and science. It isn't as profound, the history and science, but as, say, step 3 and 4. But it is a really profound approach to those for 7 and 8-year-olds, and for a lot of 10, 11, and 12-year-olds who really have not received a wonderful education. So step 2, students who are developing literacy, it's a great level for starting conversations in a family because there's a lot of things like that in it. And it develops critical thinking, it develops literacy, it develops geography. Almost every lesson plan in history has geography elements. The creative writing in step 2 teaches parts of language and is very, very useful in terms of syntax. And we don't actually teach that in any other step. Step 3 is for 9 and 10-year-olds who are reasonably literate. They read pretty well because there's a fair amount of reading in those 2 years. Step 3 for those 9 and 10-year-olds. Step 4 is the big one. It's from 11-year-olds through adults, and we have had many adults do history, science, creative writing, especially courses, and our civics courses and our current events courses and other courses that we offer at that level. Step 4 is for literate students. You have to be able to read well. You should be able to write moderately well by step 4. But step 4 is very comprehensive education, and it does not follow Common Core, as none of our curriculum does, because it is far more rigorous. We teach far more than Common Core requires. Common Core, besides being scattershot and irrelevant in the way they teach history and science, it's just shot all over the place. There is no reasonable order to anything. Common Core sets very low standards. The bar for public education is very low, and yet many large cities have over 50% of their students flunking out of schools, even with the bar that low, because they don't know how to teach successfully. And what we're talking about here is an excellent education. Homeschooling allows for it, and STEPS curriculum, which is what I'm talking to you about now, which I authored, all the courses, everything in it. STEPS curriculum is built to help a homeschooler or a private school, we have had private schools use it, to help them develop a really, truly successful education and to alter the approach to education to a more student-based, admiration-based, intelligent approach to education. So that's enough about STEPS for now, but I do want to encourage you to please take a look at STEPS, and you can come to our site, www.stepsed.com, and find out a whole lot more about the curriculum as we go into the fall semester now. STEPS does work very hard to develop literacy and critical thinking and geography in almost every lesson plan, and also teaches the subjects very, very rigorously. One thing about the way STEPS is developed, though, is that generally speaking, homeschoolers are a little bit afraid to approach certain subjects because mom and dad don't feel like they know those subjects. I know I would feel that way, for instance, about math. I would be worried to have to teach math, and you'll notice we don't offer math because I didn't write a math curriculum. There are good math curriculums out there. Well, with STEPS, you don't have to know the history or the science or creative writing or the current events or the literature guide. You don't need to know the book they're studying. As a teacher, it is completely not necessary for the parent to have any expertise at all as either a teacher or in that subject, because the course does the teaching. The course is the teacher of that particular subject. So basically the way it's designed, I try to make it as real and as easy as possible for the parent to gradually take their hands off of the student's education through Step 2, Step 3, and more so into Step 4, and increasingly put the responsibility and the ability to do that education in the hands of the student. We empower the student, not at the expense of the parent. The parent isn't being asked to teach, though. The parent is being asked more or less to keep an eye on things and make sure that the student is doing their work. You should look at their work, you should admire their work, and you will be issuing tests. There are tests in STEPS, but they only serve basically one purpose. We don't give tests to grade the student. We're not interested in issuing grades. That is not a part of what STEPS is about. We give a test to discover what exactly the student did learn from that particular small area of study and what he missed. What did he not quite get? And the test answer guide is designed so that you, mom and dad, the homeschool educator, can look at their answers and go, well, you know, Johnny, you missed the third question on the test. Go back to this page and this lesson plan and just read those materials again, and then I'm going to ask you that question again. That's it. It tells you exactly where to send the kid back in the studies so they can restudy just what got missed in the test. Make sure that they really understand it when you ask them again, that they didn't just glibly pass it. Oh, yeah, now I get it. Now I know, blah, blah, blah. If they really know it, then at the end of the test, the student should understand 100% of what they studied in STEPS, because anything they missed, they went back and restudied, and they were asked again. If you were forced to give a grade, say you're in a school district where you have to keep records and give grades, I'd feel for you if you are, but say you were forced, there's only one grade you can give a student who gets 100% of a test right. And I think we all know what that grade would be. So report cards and test grades get very easy, but you have to work the way STEPS is designed. You have to give the student the test, look at the answer guide, and anything that he really doesn't seem to understand, because these aren't multiple choice questions. We don't have any of those. They're conceptual. You know, who was Alexander the Great? If he really can't answer that question, he goes back and he restudies it. And then you ask him, and he should be able to give you a pretty good answer. If he gets it, he gets it. Move on to the next area of study, and every time he moves on to the next area of study, he can do so with confidence, and so can you as an educator, because you know he understood 100% of the material studied per that test. That's all we use tests for in STEPS. We don't use them for any other purpose but to determine where to send the student back to restudy questions that they didn't 100% grasp. So every course, pretty much every course, not in Step 1, but once you start Step 2 with 7- and 8-year-olds, there are tests in all the history and science courses not so much in the arts courses because that's not about testing. That's about a skill set, and the test is, can they do that thing? Can they sing? Can they act? That's what arts are all about. All right, so that gives you a basic idea of steps, so I'm going to start wrapping this up now. If there is anybody on who needs to ask me a question or wants to ask me a question, now would be a good time. So let's unmute it.
All callers are muted. All callers are unmuted.
So anybody wants to talk to me can talk to me? Is anybody there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, who's that? So anybody
This
can
is a person then.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I can't think of any questions, but every time I hear you, it fills in kind of some missing little parts about the best view to have about everything. So I appreciate being able to hear what you had to say to everyone.
Oh, I thank you. Thank you very much. I have been an educator for a long time, and I have spent 30,000 hours on steps trying to find better ways to educate. So I appreciate that. It is a life's work at this point, and I want people to be happy being educated. I want students to shine and soar. So I do appreciate that. Next, anybody? No? Okay. All righty. Well, we're going to wrap this up now. Listen, thank you for listening in. Whoever's out there, thank you very much. And I hope you found this informative and useful. And we'll probably do another one in a couple of months, I think. All right. Bye-bye.